I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today, my guest is Rebbe Meir Ben Moshe. Welcome.
Thanks, Phil.
Glad to have you. And today's prophetic topic is going to be real simple, unity through diversity. And has a lot of meanings. We're going to talk about a few of them. But the thrust of this show, for the most part, is about walking whatever spiritual path Spirit guides you to not be restricted just because it's different or it seems like it might be foreign. And it's through that diversity that we grow. Sometimes we get it in one place, sometimes we have to go to 20 places. The point is not how many places we stop along the way. The point is, are we willing to walk the path? So that's our topic, unity through diversity. And this is going to be an interesting journey. And you're going to be our guide. Take it away. Introduce yourself.
Thank you. Reverend Phil, I'm Dr. Melvin Richkind, and I also am known as Rebbe Meir Ben Moshe. And my journey with the Shivananda Vedanta Yoga Center gave me another name, Mahadev. And what's interesting about that particular journey is when Swami Atma came to me and said, we need to give you a Hindu name. And I said, oh, how wonderful. What a thrill. 3 months went by, and finally he came to me and he said, I've chosen Mahadev for you. And I don't speak Sanskrit. And so my body language was rather neutral, and everyone else around him went, and I had no idea. And he said to me, Mahadev. And I said, I'm sorry, but I don't know what Mahadev means. And he said, it means great God or great Lord. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, this is an amazing story in itself. Because serendipitously, when I was named and circumcised, when I first came into the world as a Jew, my Hebrew name, which gave me my task in life, was Meir Ben Moshe. So I carry the personal name of Meir, and my father's name was Moshe. And of course, Meir means from the light, and Moshe is to lift up. And so as my life has unfolded, it's become more and more about that, and I felt more and more comfortable as I began to realize that my life took on more and more meaning as I was filled with those feelings of pathos, the feelings of essence. And so that really was the impetus behind the path that I've taken personally in my life.
Did you have any reaction to I'm assuming the yogi or Swami who gave you the name that, you don't know what you're talking about. Do you know who you're dealing with?
I was blown away. I was blown away by the fact that he was able to come up with that. I never gave him any history. I never told him what my Hebrew name was. I never told him anything.
So this was more of a reaffirmation.
Well, it was the beginning of my understanding that there was something more to life than the physical world.
So how did a individual who grows up Jewish wind up studying Hinduism or Vedantism?
Oh, it was an amazing path. I had come to Santa Fe kicking and screaming. I had a marvelous scientific and medical bioclinical experience in Los Angeles. I was well accepted and was professor at the medical school at UCLA, and I was deeply steeped in medicine and surgery and research and teaching and all that kind of stuff. And suddenly I'm looking at the possibility of leaving a center of higher learning and coming to Santa Fe. And as I had visited it, I thought to myself, what am I doing to my career? What am I doing to my life? And lo and behold, a friend of mine said, Mel, you are suited for Santa Fe. You will experience things. You will finally come into touch who you really are. And so I took that opportunity and decided I'd give it a shot. And I was given a 5-year hiatus to rediscover myself.
Now let's back this up a couple of things. So up until the time you left California, did you have any spiritual practice, any
None.
religious practice?
None.
Okay.
None.
Another question. In all your medical training, was there ever any discussion of the role of spirit in the healing process?
No. But there was an interesting point that I remember very prophetically, and that is I was studying, my major as an undergraduate at that point in time was about animal biology, and I had to take a class in embryology. And I was profoundly moved by the concept of ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny.
Can you break that down for the people
I
watching?
will explain that. When one looks at the various developmental stages embryologically, in the phylum of vertebrates, you can look at an embryo at various stages of development and you can't tell what it's going to become. So that's the individual development. But depending upon the species, whether it's a cartilaginous fish, whether it's a bony fish, whether it's an amphibian, whether it's a bird, a reptile, or a mammal, those individual stages of development at certain times of development are indistinguishable. It's not until that particular organism undergoes full development that it takes on its physical appearance.
So if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is at some point it will be the same whether it's a cat or a dog
Or a fish,
or a
bird.
You can't distinguish what it's
No.
going to become, or even a human?
No, that's the whole point. Not even a human. Not until it becomes a fetus does the physical characteristics start to take on some semblance of what it's going to be. But then it's only in the last trimester of development that the individual starts to look like a fish or a bird or a reptile or a mammal or a snake, a reptile.
So our topic, unity and diversity. We've got a core unity of, if I'm hearing you correctly, of everything that's an animal, mammal, human form, bird,
Exactly.
reptile. That at some point
Yeah.
we are indistinguishable, which means we're all coming from one place.
Yes, and of course the philosophical aspect of mysticism, as opposed to organized religion, the essence is right there, because if one looks at stem cell, a stem cell can differentiate itself into whatever it needs to be to make that organism function properly. And the highest world of divinity is Adam Kadmon. And Adam Kadmon is the genetic pattern for what will become spiritually, theologically.
So the medical field, back when you were learning this stuff, did they explain it spiritually? How did
No.
they just,
No.
this is just the way it
No,
is, and we're
look
not
in the
gonna question
microscope
it?
and you'll be able to follow it along. As a matter of fact, we were able to take frog eggs, unfertilized, and collect frog sperm, and then look in the microscope and put the two together and actually watch fertilization occur and watch things start to develop on a unity basis.
So did you have a reaction to this when it was happening?
Oh, I was
or-
amazed. I was blown away.
But did you see it spiritually? Did it
No, I
trigger
didn't see it
anything?
spiritual. I saw it physically. My whole life was in the physical world at that point. I had no idea of what spirit was all about.
So what happened that you were a non-practicing Jew? I mean, something must have...
How did that all evolve?
Well, if you started off, I mean, just curious, what got you off the path? Let's put it that way.
Well, I never really got off the path. I realized as a highly trained scientist, clinician, researcher, specialization in internal medicine kind of thing, that no matter what we did in the world of science, we could never recreate that which was created. So no matter how hard we tried, and we could always take the elements that had already been formed and put them together and watch development, but we couldn't put the elements together so that there was an imperfection in science because the seeds for the future could not be reproduced.
Okay. So did that lead you back to spiritual practice?
No. What happened was, what's interesting is there's a concept, a teaching concept, and that is, what is the lesson in karmic relationships with oneself and with others? And that unfolded itself as wisdom as years went by. And I found myself in a very difficult emotional situation because I had to choose between my family and my survival. And when that all dissolved, I went to what was called then Codependence Anonymous.
Okay.
The concept of codependency. And I'll never forget, it was Passover. And I was sitting at a table, and a couple of women were having a conversation about codependency. It was a brand new concept. It wasn't more than 6 months or a year old. And there was a woman who was giving a monologue as an actress. And I thought, gee, you know, they were so involved in it and they got so emotional about it. I thought, I should go see what it's about. So I went that Sunday and I listened to this monologue on codependency and I went, my goodness, you know, she's talking about me.
That's my life story.
And my life story, you know, all this emotional pain that I've been feeling, I didn't understand it. I didn't know why it was happening to me. All I knew is that whenever I got triggered by what they were calling codependency, was making me dysfunctional, seriously dysfunctional. And so that was really the beginning of how I got to where I'm at today. Because when I started going to meetings 7 days a week in the beginning, and it was so wonderful to hear other people's stories, because I realized, you know, there was nothing unique about who I was at that point in time, and that everybody suffered emotionally. And later on, when I started in with my yoga practice, there were gurus and yogis that came from India, and they'd always talk about the eternal struggle.
Yeah.
That which life, what is life about? It's about struggle. And I realized what they were talking about, you know. It's like, and I never really understood it completely, but it stuck in my mind because I was experiencing an aspect of all of that. So that was really the beginning of my spiritual path. When I...
But that spiritual path didn't seem to awaken Judaism in you. It walked you down a whole other...
No, it didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't. But after after spending almost 10 years in Codependence Anonymous, which is this 12-step program, the beginning of those 12 steps were about surrender. And the last 2 steps were all about discovering and turning your life over to God. And I went, wow, God isn't what you see, you know. And then what happened in October of 1992 is I had gone to Yom Kippur services. And the rabbi at the particular congregation that I was going to was in hiatus. And there was a woman rabbi that came from Santa Monica, California, and she gave the sermon in the middle of the service. And what she said was what really connected me. She said, God isn't what you see, it's what you feel. I didn't know what pathos was then. Now I understand the term pathos. It's a feeling for essence. And I got it immediately. And for 3 years, I couldn't stop smiling. Suddenly there was this unconditional love for something that I could feel that was above and beyond anything I'd ever experienced before, because I'd always questioned the existence of God, never understanding how that could be. I mean, everybody talked about it. Everybody had their different opinions as to what it was. And what I didn't understand at that point is that in Judaism, it's not about having a visual connection. It's about having an auricular connection. It's all about stories. It's all about connection through stories. It's not what we see, it's what we feel.
But all the stories, I mean, not all the stories, but good percentage of the stories in the Old Testament are about direct divine intervention, whether God is speaking to directly or sending angels directly. So isn't the message kind of like telling you that if you don't have that connection, if like God doesn't come down and stop you from killing your son, or I mean,
well, over the years, that's a very good question, because over the years, organized religion, unless a person gets organized religion from the time they're very small, they don't question. In my case, I come from a family of Orthodox Judaism from the East. My family lineage is the Kohen, the priest of the temple. And my mother looked at Orthodox Judaism and said, there's something here that's not complete for me. And she moved the whole family to California, Southern California. And so I was removed from all of that Eastern Orthodox Jewish upbringing. So I didn't really have much of a Jewish education until I was in my early 30s when I decided I should get bar mitzvahed. And I did it through the Hillel House at the University of California at Davis. So that was really a point at which, when I was 13, I certainly had a party, and I had a big party, and I got all kinds of presents, and I got enough money to put in the bank for a bank account, and I got my first Schwinn bicycle, and I have a picture. My mother has the picture of today I'm a fountain pen. Everybody got fountain pens, kind of thing. But it didn't really start resonating with me until I went up to the University of California at Davis and realized that there was something missing in my life, but I didn't quite understand what it was. But I did get bar mitzvahed.
So through childhood, there was no real emphasis in any particular spiritual practice?
None. There are so many wonderful festivals and holidays in Judaism that we just never celebrated. Hanukkah would come up, and every night I'd get some little present and light a candle. But the bruchas, the blessings, were never done. And my grandmother my loving grandmother on my father's side and my two loving aunts who took charge of my well-being and treated me like a little prince in the family. And my mother giggles about that because she says that's exactly what they did to you. Thought I should have a Christmas tree. I was very young. I was born in '39, and this was in the early '40s. And so I had a little Christmas tree, and I had little presents because they didn't want me to feel different from the rest of the secular world. And it got to a point where my father was so angry with what they were doing. And of course, Israel's colors are blue and white. So as a teenager, I was working as a box boy, and they had all these beautifully white colored Christmas trees, small ones, and I got blue lights and I got blue bulbs, you know, and I strung blue and white crepe paper in the dining room with a big Star of David, and before my parents came home, I had it all set up, you know, and my father, my mother walked in the room and went, "Oh, isn't that beautiful?" And my father walked into the room and said, "Get out of this house." He essentially kicked me out of the house as a teenager and said, "This will not exist in my home." He was very, very conservative.
So you wind up in a 12-step program.
Right.
Second step is came to believe a power greater than ourselves. So they don't really say the G word.
Right.
And then they trick you into the third step, which actually just uses the G word. How did you react to that?
I was confused. How do you relate to a higher power? And I'm not going to call it the G word. I'm going to say God, because that's what everybody, you know, everybody. I mean, it gets a lot of people upset when you say God, because it goes back to all of that. You will, and you'll do this, and you'll do that, or this is going to happen to you. See, I never got any of that, and so that was the question. I mean, essentially, that was the question that I had: was how do I believe in something that I don't understand the existence of? I can't see it. So what is there about it? And of course, there are many other pathways that have all kinds of statues and deities and things that they can relate to. But in Judaism, we don't have any of those things. We have stories. We have the oral tradition. We talk about it, but we don't see it. So on Yom Kippur in 1992, I went for a walk in Abiquiu because through the 12-step program, I wanted to connect with the universe. And about this time, I started getting interested in meditation. And I had met a couple who were here in Santa Fe, and they had put out a flyer, and I went to see them. And it was the Mat Sat form of meditation from the north of India. And so I took training. I sat. So what I wanted to do was, but I still didn't get this God thing. So I went out to Abiquiu and walked where George O'Keeffe had done a lot of painting, and took the trail to the end of Box Canyon. And it was a beautiful day. Fall, the sky was blue, and it was a warm, wonderful, beautiful afternoon. And there was a spring in Box Canyon. And it furnished all the water for the plants were so beautiful. They were so green. There were different shades of green, and the contrast with the blue sky was overwhelmingly beautiful. And there was this big flat rock, and I climbed up on the rock. And I remember this so well because it was so beautiful. It was noisy. And I sat down in half lotus, and lo and behold, I was doing an open eye meditation. And after about 20 minutes went by, and I gazed down, and I had inadvertently sat down with a rattlesnake who was all coiled up on the top of this rock. And I went, you should be careful what you ask for. And I realized I'd been there for 20 minutes, And the snake didn't crawl up to sit next to me. I sat down inadvertently next to the snake, not seeing him because of the noise of all of nature's beauty. And I realized, if he didn't bite me by now, he's not gonna. So I closed my eyes and I stayed there for another 20 minutes. So I had a 40-minute meditation, and I got up very slowly and walked off of the rock, and I was in sheer nirvana. I had never experienced anything like this, and so I immediately called my two teachers, and they wrote a letter to the guru in charge of all of that, and then he wrote me back a letter. I was surprised, shocked, and they made a big deal about that whole thing. I guess the snake was a sign of some kind that I didn't understand at that point in time. And so then what happened was I went to Yom Kippur services, and then came the teaching of God isn't what you, during the sermon, God isn't what you see, it's what you feel. And I had experienced that.
So there's a certain amount of parallel path walking at this point. You're starting to explore Judaism, and you're starting to explore
Yes.
Hinduism.
Oh, it went further than that. It went further than that. Because I had gone to a satsang and had met this community of sannyasins, people who had lived in community and who had followed their teacher Rajneesh through India for a number of years. And there was a whole colony of sannyasins in Santa Fe. And I had gone to, so I'd gone to this.
If my Sanskrit is correct, sannyasin is monk.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And so I went to this satsang on Alto Street, where there was a community gathering space. I don't know if it exists there anymore or not. And I went by myself, and when I walked into this room, you could cut the love in the air with a knife. It was so thick. I'd never been in a group of people that had that kind of energy before. It was something I'd never experienced. And that was in October-ish. And so then I went to a New Year's Eve party, and someone fixed me up with a blind date. And she was a sannyasin. And I went, and all of a sudden, I was experiencing secular New Year's with all these incredibly wonderful people. Well, off in a corner, there was a guy, a man, who was from New York, and his name was Mel. And I noticed throughout the evening, he just sat and stared at me all the time. I thought, what? He wasn't very old. I thought, what is going on? And he finally came up and introduced himself to me, and he said, I'm from New York. My name is Mel. I was born Jewish, but my name is now Bharat, and I live in Lucknow, India. And he happened to be one of Papaji's students, as Andrew Cohen was. So here was this path that was all about what I felt as an essence to be loving kindness. And I'd never experienced that before. And it was at that point that I asked myself, how is everybody the same? And how is everybody different? What is it about their spiritual path that draws them to a certain, to a certain space, to a certain point, to a certain essence? And so I decided I would enter into that world of spirit and find out. So I started asking all those questions, but engaging myself physically. And so at that point, that's when and now it's January of 1993. And in this group of sannyasins, there was another gentleman that I met whose house the party was at. He was from New York, and he was Jewish, and he was a hair cutter and a hair designer, and he was driving around in a Mercedes. And his story was the physical world doesn't offer me anything. He sold his Mercedes. He got rid of his coiffure in New York. He had an amazing following, and he left a great deal of money to enter into this path. And I found him really interesting. And through our talks, he started to talk about mystical Judaism, Kabbalah, and I said, "What's that?" You know, so I decided I'd find out what Kabbalah was about. I was already experiencing the Sannyasin path. What I wanted to know was, what else was there out there?
Let me ask you a question here. Were the people you were involved with practicing Hinduism, or they practicing Vedanta?
Well, that was a part of the Hindu path. I mean, the Hindu path has so many different sects to it. So they were practicing the path of the Sannyasin, but I didn't understand what that was in the beginning.
I mean, the reason I asked that is because, I mean, Vedanta is really a philosophy void of deities. Hinduism is a religion with probably more deities than Catholicism has saints.
Exactly.
And if you're into the Hinduism, I mean, how much further away can you be from Judaism, which is the one God, than Hinduism, which is the panacea by more gods than you could shake a stick
Well,
at?
what happened was, as I did my yoga practice at the Shivananda Vedanta Yoga Center on Wednesday night, it was more than doing yoga. I did yoga 3 nights a week in Los Angeles, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night. And Wednesday night after yoga practice, they had satsang. And so suddenly, the very issue you raise was what I was beginning to experience. So I didn't really put the two together. I knew that they were different, but I didn't understand how different. I didn't understand the details of it all. I was experiencing essence. That's all I could really feel. I didn't know it was essence that I was experiencing. And then I took up hand drumming, and so during satsang I could get into the rhythms, the Eastern rhythms. So, as I stayed with the yoga practice and became a yogi, after 5 or 6 years went by, because I did this for 10 years, that's when I got my Hindu name.
So now we're rolling forward again. You've got a Hindu practice.
Right.
And you're getting introduced to the Kabbalah.
Well, we have to go back a little bit.
Go for it.
Because shortly after my experience with the sannyasins, there was a lady friend that I had who said the spring equinox is coming up, and there's this wonderful teacher. He's a Toltec Nawal, and she said, "I think you really will enjoy him." And so we went on a 4-day retreat over the spring equinox.
Vision quest.
Excuse me?
A vision quest.
I didn't know.
Okay.
I didn't know what I was going for, you know. She had said to me, "This is the most beautiful thing you'll ever experience." And I thought, the snake, the yoga practice, the experience in satsang, how bad could it be, you know? I mean, I always have the opportunity of saying, I don't want to do this anymore. So I went to this 4-day retreat in Teotihuacan in Mexico, in the Yucatan. And all of a sudden, I was thrust into a situation where people from all over the world came to listen to what this guy had to say. And all I could do was sit and listen. I didn't understand their language. But then I started to experience his teachings. And Teotihuacan was the University of the Toltec. And he was the Toltec Nawal. His grandpa was, his great-grandpa was, and he became, through the teachings of his parent, of his lineage. And so, and lo and behold, he had a companion that was helping him put on these journeys. And she turned out to be the administrative assistant to the dean at the veterinary medical school that I attended when I was at Davis in the 70s, or in the 60s actually. So it was not that I was there all by myself, but when I started listening and talking with the people that had come to listen to him, and I thought, this is, people are from all over the world. There must be something really special about what's going on here. And so what he did was he took us through the path of the snake, the Mayan god, Kukulkan. And so he took us to this staging area, and we went through ceremony, and then he showed everybody their aura, because the sun was behind us, shedding light. And I looked down and my aura was green. I thought, oh, I don't know what that means. And then we had the ceremony, and it was the leap of faith that we took from this gathering area to the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl. And I went, okay. So Quetzalcoatl was the Toltec name for the snake, whereas Kukulkan was the Mayan name for the snake. So that was the commonality in their spiritual path. And it was all about entering the snake's mouth at the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, and then being digested. And the path that we took is the Avenida de los Muertos. So it was like dying and then being reborn. And then coming out at the Pyramid of the Moon with the Temple of the Jaguar. And I mean, it was, spiritually speaking, it was incredibly moving, because we went through these different worlds, the world of physicality, and the world of emotions, and the world of the mind, and then the world of their form of divinity, where we came out of the snake pure, innocent and vulnerable and connected to our higher power. And it was an overwhelming feeling. And as a matter of fact, when we went back to Mexico City, after being out there for the weekend, to look at the Aztec ruins in Mexico City, after we had done that, everybody else went to bed in the hotel we were staying in, and I was lofted. I mean, I was spiritually spaced in the most incredible space I'd ever experienced before. I went wandering through Mexico City, the most dangerous city in the world to wander by yourself, and came back unscarred, unscathed. And one of the most interesting things that I had experienced were these Aztec drummers on the plaza in Mexico City. And I still remember that beat. And every so often I'll pick up my hand drum and redo that. So that was really a profound experience for me. So now there was this other path. And I spent 3 years with Don Miguel sitting in satsang and learning and teaching the Toltec way.
Let's take this from the external and bring it more into the internal for a second. At any point, did you have a sense of divine guidance, that these experiences had purpose?
Not yet. No, not yet. Not yet. I felt this beauty of the Sphirot of Tiferet. That I felt. I felt the loving kindness of the Sphirot of Chesed. When I had no real giver, no real judgment about what was going on, because it was all so emotional. So actually what I was feeling is I was feeling the emotionality of the physical world. I hadn't really gotten up the tree to the place where I was really feeling what was the world of divinity.
How did you, or did you have to reconcile these diverse paths? I mean,
my intention was not reconciling the diverse paths. My intention was experiencing the diverse paths to see how everybody was the same and how everybody was different.
What similarities did you see?
Well, actually, it was essence.
So we're getting back to the core.
Yeah, it was really about essence. and the physicality, the diverseness of their path, I could see then how things started to fall in place with one another. I could see how there was a path. I didn't understand what the path was really all about. Even though it was defined, I still wasn't completely understanding. I didn't have enough wisdom yet to completely understand it. And so it wasn't until I met Rabbi Jonathan Omerman and Rabbi Zalman Schachter, who's now up in Boulder. And I wanted to study Jewish meditation. And Jonathan had come to Santa Fe. And Zalman had preceded him and started talking about the angels, where as he traveled, he had all of these major angels in front of him, behind him, on either side of him. And I went, and then he came up to me, and he put his hand on my heart, and he looked to the heavens, and he closed his eyes, and I said, and I told this to Jonathan when I started sitting with him to learn to be a Jewish meditator. And he said, "Oh, that sounds like Zalman." So when I got to Metifta in Los Angeles and joined the group, I joined it essentially to find a group to meditate with. But before he would allow me to do that, he made me take a class in Jewish meditation that he trained.
What drew you to Jewish meditation? You had a Hindu meditation practice.
There was something about who Jonathan was. You know, Jonathan was one of the 5 rabbis that was invited to Dharamsala by the Dalai Lama. And those 5 rabbis, there was a book written about those 5 rabbis because they had all gone to India or to Dharamsala or to the original aspect of Buddhist thought before the Chinese ran the Dalai Lama out. And what happened to these people is they came back to Judaism and became trained rabbis now, only now they were all meditators. And so I found myself in a group of Jewish people who were all meditating and who had rabbis with this Eastern thought a part of their being. And most of it was Buddhist at that point, but some had yoga practices, so there was a Hindu path there too. Well, as I stayed and meditated with this group at Metifta, my life started to get very full because I was going to the ashram in Venice doing my yoga thing. And then I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to meet people at Metifta. So we would meditate, and then after we meditated, we would have mystical Jewish teachings. It was my entrance into Kabbalah. And they were all the teaching of Reb Nachman of Breslov, and in Maharan Lichutei, or Lichutei Maharan, and very, very deep stuff. And so I sat and I listened, and I started feeling the essence of all of this. But then in January of that year, I started sitting with Yehudis Fishman, and I sat with her and learned Torah from her for 10 years. And the best way of describing Yehudis was she's the most incredible human being, a woman, I've ever met. She was so balanced, and she was so connected to spirit in a way I'd never really have ever known a Jewish woman to be. It certainly wasn't what I was used to. So she was like this Jewish woman who was alive and well, living in Santa Fe, who moved to Boulder. And I thought to myself, So I started listening to how she was interpreting the study of Torah. And so Torah, of course, recycles every year. And after I stayed with her for 10 years, suddenly the Lubavitch Orthodox community in Santa Fe became available to me. And on Saturday, I would go with them and sit Shabbos. And they would get into these incredible conversations, these teaching conversations, these discussions at the Shabbos table. And I just was a sponge. I'd listen and listen and listen. And as I learned the Orthodox ways, I knew that I couldn't practice the Orthodox ways. But the essence of their stories were so incredibly beautiful. But I couldn't have a Jewish practice as complete as they wanted me to have. I couldn't connect. I couldn't connect with the practice, but I could connect with the stories in Torah as Yehudis and Asher Katz would talk about. And I thought to myself, this is amazing. I mean, it was like getting information as an adult that I could sit and learn about and listen to, and then feel what it was that I needed to feel because of the Eastern thought that was in my body as well.
So were these starting to tie together?
Yes.
At this point?
Yes, it did. And I started realizing that I was really a contemplative mystic. I wasn't comfortable with organized religion. And how lucky I was that my mother took me out of New York, out of the East Coast, out of Cleveland, Ohio, and moved the family to California, where I could find my own path. And then what a beautiful gift it was that the mother of my children had brought me to New Mexico, dumped me in Santa Fe, so that not only could I have my own life and my own path and my own truth, but I could stumble into these other pathways of spiritual awakening and be able to actually feel how beautiful it was to be able to be that, and how lucky I was to accomplish all of that.
And in retrospect, did you sense, like the same question I asked you earlier, any sense of divine synchronicity, divine ordination, that all this stuff was meant to happen, and that this is not something you just stumbled on?
It was. I thought it was all an accident. There are no accidents. There are no accidents. It was meant to be. And I remember my surgical assistant, when I had my clinic in Los Angeles, came to me and said, you know, my father is a reverend and a minister, and I've been telling him about you, because we would discuss, you know, on one of the Saturday mornings for years, I'd gone and helped somebody with a practice who was going to Est, and we would have these luncheon talks together, you know. And and then I started reading these books out of the California State University, their psychology department, the Mail, the New Mail, and all that kind of stuff. And I started to realize that there was more to life than I had given credit to. And this was also something that I was very, very interested in. So I remember this young man said to me, my father thinks he's going to die and he wants someone to take over his church. And I thought, I'm not ready. I'm not, you know, I'm just not at a place where I can do any of this. But he had me ordained anyway. And I looked at this ordination and I said to myself, this doesn't have any real substance. This doesn't have any really authenticity in the world of theology. There was a lot of work that I needed to do if I was going to live up to this thing. And sure enough, his father died. And I thought to myself, I'm not ready to do all this. And so as my path unfolded, fortunately for me, the teachers that I picked were teachers you couldn't find in a yeshiva. These were masters. These were almost like prophets. These were people who taught essence and spirituality on a level that I had never, ever, ever heard anybody ever talk about in organized religion. And I thought to myself, you know, I'm going to immerse myself in all of this. And so by the time I turned 50, that's when I started studying Kabbalah.
I'm going to cut you off right there for a second. I got to make a few announcements, and we're going to come back and kind of, not even so much on the Kabbalah. We're going to leave that for another show.
Okay.
What I want to come back and give you some fourth warning, so to speak, is let's go right back to the topic and close out with unity through diversity. But let me make a few announcements here. Hi out there. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wouldn't have chosen it. I didn't think you would. You're watching Words of the Prophet, and you're watching us on Public Access Channel 16. And it's exactly what it means, public access. So you're part of the whole process. It's not just me, and it's not just my guests, and it's not just the people in the production. It's you too. And love to hear from you. Things you'd like to, questions about what you hear here, maybe topics you'd like for me to explore on a future show. Maybe you want to do a show with me. That's not unheard of. That's happened a couple of times. So, whatever it is, love to hear from you. Use the contact information that's been flashing on the screen. Also want you to know that I am a spiritual counselor. What that means is that I do not buy into the concept of talk therapy that asks us to solve our problems with the same instrument that creates them. That really doesn't happen. So I work with people and show them how to use the spirit that they possess, how to develop it and use it to heal from any aspects of life that are making them feel dis-ease. I do not charge for my services. It's strictly a donation basis. God takes care of me, so money does not have to become an issue. So if you think I could be of help to you in something, feel free to contact me and we can talk and set something up. Next week, old friend coming back. Those of you who've been around here for a while or were with me on radio, my good friend Washali is going to be here. We're going to talk about the only thing Washali and I ever talk about, which is love. Her favorite saying is, you don't need love, you are love. And we're going to explore that and a lot of other aspects of love as well. So tune in next week. And just a couple of announcements for our good friends up at Unity Santa Fe. And that's at 1212 Unity Way, and they have a bunch of things going on in the upcoming week and change. On Friday, April 1st, starting at 7 p.m., is an open mic night. It's an evening dedicated to the love of words and for honoring those who listen to them muse and write what is theirs to uniquely express. On Monday, April 4th, from 7 to 9 p.m., an Edwin Gaines workshop titled Prosperity Plus, covering the 4 spiritual principles of prosperity: finding your divine purpose, forgiveness and worthiness, tithing and giving, and setting clear-cut goals. There's a love offering attached to that. And then Friday, on April 15th, from 7 to 9, is an introduction to compassionate communication, accessing the roots of compassion within oneself and others. And then after the introduction, on Saturday the 16th, from 10 in the morning till 5 at night, and on Sunday the 17th, from 2 till 6 in the afternoon, is a compassionate communication workshop. There is a fee involved. We don't talk about money on the air, so if you want to know more about this or anything going on up there, Nancy Holtzman at 989-4433. So we got about 3 minutes, sir. Unity through diversity.
Well, it was my interaction with Rabbi Hersher Yalis when I was trying to get into a Jewish meditation teacher's class. He wrote a letter to Rabbi Omerman, who's the modern day Kabbalist, and is quite authentic in his teachings. And so the unity that I experienced was when Rabbi Yalis, as the Lubavitcher, wrote a letter to Rabbi Omerman calling me a Torah Chacham Rebbe. And I realized at that point where my whole practice, my whole feeling, my whole essence of pathos was in the feeling of love that I had for my higher power of God. And that it didn't matter whether I was a Reform Jew, a conservative Jew, a renewal Jew, or an Orthodox, super Orthodox Jew. It wasn't about how we practiced. It was, we were all Jews. So the way in which we choose to connect with our higher power is the unity. The diversity is the various pathways that each different group has, but yet we're able to go to the same place.
And that is the ultimate connection. Going back to the beginning of those embryos that are all undistinguishable, one source. This is the same thing that your path has taught you about religion?
There is some organized religion that makes certain kinds of holidays and festivals interesting. But going back to the written Torah, looking at Genesis, the chapter of Noah, Noah talks about the 7 Noahide laws, which will eventually be for everyone. So he talks about unity through diversity in a book that's the holiest book that the Jewish people have.
So then people who want to look that up, can you give them a reference? What chapter and verse?
Well, Noah is the second chapter in Genesis, the first book of the 5 books of Moses.
Okay.
But it really does require a teacher to show you where it is, because it's not, you know, what's in the written Torah is then explained in Talmud, which is the Mishnah and the Gemara, and none of it is very clear. So, but the 7 laws are essentially very much like the 10 Commandments and give boundaries to a uniform community.
We're going to have to cut it at that point. We have about a minute left. Rebbe, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we will be back and do a show on the Kabbalah somewhere in the summer.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you really got something out of this, because there is unity and there is diversity, and they are not contradictory. They go hand in hand. You know, just to honor the path and know that you are one with that path and you are one with the source of that path. And how you want to honor that path then becomes up to you. So until next week, thank you for tuning in. Know that you are that one, that you are love, you are light. Your job is not to let God in, your job is to let God out. Demonstrate it in the world and watch how much better the world becomes. Blessings to you all. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.